Good evening. My name is Erica Ifill, and I'm an economist and journalist with the Hill Times. I also co-host the Bad Bitchy Podcast, an intersectional feminist podcast, and am a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant with the company Not in My Color. Oxfam reports that inequality contributes to the death of at least one person every 4 seconds. This is not surprising considering who has been winning and who has been losing for the past 5 decades of supply-side economics. The complex forces which led to the downturn of the 1970s have continued to shape Western economies, particularly globalization, which has accelerated as information technology has made communication and coordination easier. So in comes the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 and supply side economics, which prioritized tax cuts in the growth of government spending, both income taxes and capital gains, regulations on businesses, and the expansion of money supply. Reaganomics is consistent with the theory of supply side economics, which states that corporate cuts are the best ways to grow the economy. When companies get more cash, they should hire new workers and expand their businesses. It also says that income tax cuts give workers more incentive to work, increasing the labor supply. That's why it's sometimes called trickle-down economics. But Reagan didn't lower government spending. He shifted it from domestic programs to defense. The result, the federal debt almost tripled. Domestic programs include social programs that benefit the poor, working, and middle class. Defense is the playground of the rich and powerful. In this sense, the term economic violence in Oxfam's report were structural and systemic policy and political choices that are skewed in favor of the richest and most powerful people result in direct harm to the vast majority of ordinary people worldwide is fulfilled. The 1990s saw the supply side economics trend with globalization through the emphasis on trade liberalization. Multinational corporations became the main carriers of economic growth in globalization. They globally organized production and allocated resources according to the principle of profit maximization with global supply chains. As we can see from the pandemic, the optimized efficiency of global supply chain management was not able to be agile enough to weather shocks. Globalization increased the pace of deindustrialization, which is the erosion of an economy's manufacturing base. As such, Western countries have exported the middle class to developing countries. Historically, manufacturing has been the means to economic progress over generations. Immigrants and the poor and working class were able to provide their families with a standard of living that provided complete healthcare benefits, sick days, vacation, pensions, and educational supports that allowed their children to attend universities and colleges as a form of social and economic progression over a generation. Today, through successive cuts to education and the disappearance of manufacturing jobs, coupled with the appearance of service jobs that are precarious and provide zero benefits, that is no longer the case. Jobs were lost because of the structural changes arising from globalization. Structural changes led to structural unemployment and also widened the gap between rich and poor within a country. Simultaneously, during this time, governments continued the supply side economics theme of cutting government spending. We see those successive cuts in healthcare that have left us with a tattered health system, unable to properly deal with and absorb the shock of a global pandemic. We also continue to see massive cuts in social spending and increasing national security and police spending or defense spending. Governments also supported the growth of the communications and technological industries that were the fuel of globalization. The massive tax breaks of tech companies were brought in by governments who cited innovation as an economic engine of economic growth in the increasing competitive global environment. However, innovators became monopolists and gatekeepers in no time. Their political power increased as shareholders demanded greater and greater returns and mergers and acquisitions in the now privatized environments, another remnant of supply-side economics, and Reagan's and Thatcher's economic policies continued. As wealth grew, so did political power. It is here where the tail wagged the dog. where large, powerful companies demanded preferential tax treatments and lax labor laws to continue operating in the countries that made them. As a result, governments engaged in a race to the bottom and to balance the books did so on the backs of poor, working class, and marginalized people in the form of reduced social spending. What is clear about the pandemic is that there has been a massive wealth transfer from public to private entities through the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, or CEWS. As Mr. McDonald noted in his report with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, more than 1/3 of the companies headed by those CEOs received the COVID-19 wage subsidy, either directly or indirectly, through their subsidiaries or franchisees. Corporations continue to get this support, while support for workers through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit has been cut. As of December 19th, Ottawa has paid out $99.13 billion under the program. This represents the environment that has fostered the growth of economic inequality and has ushered in the era of economic violence we are seeing now. Thank you.